Joining us now for World Brief and the review of some of the headlines of today's newspapers from around the world is Adefemi Akinsanya. Good morning.
Good morning, Dr. Rubin. Good morning, Ayo.
Good morning.
Good morning, Rufai. It is. That is me. That is me. Thank you. Thank you very much. That's me. Thank you. And Ayo, thank you for my lovely earrings. I'm wearing them today. And they match my dress. So thank you very, very much. Good morning to you viewers. I know. Good morning to you viewers. Let me tell you what's happening around the world. Let's begin in Canada, where British Columbia's Premier and other politicians in the region have sharply criticized leaders of a Western Canadian separatist movement, accusing them of treason. That's after they held secret talks with US officials about support for Alberta's possible independence. Now, the group linked to Alberta Property Project reportedly discussed a $500 billion loan to build what would be a new country, though US officials say no formal commitments were ever made. However, let's take a closer look at Alberta itself so we can understand what is happening here. So if we look at this map, Alberta itself is a province in Canada, essentially, right? It's in Western Canada, and it is rich in natural resources, things like oil, gas, and petrochemicals. All of those things anchor Alberta's economy, makes it very, very attractive, particularly in the Athabasca oil sands. Now, it's also Canada's largest producer of crude oil and natural gas. And as we've already established, it's a leader in renewable energies too, such as wind and hydrogen. So it is strategically and resource-based very important. However, when we break this down and look at the situation, it's clearly the separatists versus the government. So separatists on this side of the screen, they're arguing that their efforts are about self-determination, not really about betrayal or treason. And they're working to collect signatures for a referendum. They're trying to get to the 1 million signature mark. However, the Canadian leader Mark Carney and his pushback, essentially, he's stressing that Canada's sovereignty and unity is something that cannot be broken, and it warns against any foreign involvement in domestic politics. So very interesting to see what is going to happen there, especially since the likes of Canada have quite frosty relations with the United States as it stands. Let's move on to the United Kingdom, right? So we have the information that we know that this week, UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer became the first British Prime Minister to visit China since 2018. Now, over the course of this 3-day trip, it was billed as a reset in strained relations between the United Kingdom and China. And it did result in some developments. So, for example, you do have visa-free travel for British citizens for up to 30 days, and that opens up tourism and business progress within the countries. There's also progress on trade access with reduced tariffs on Scottish whisky and new UK investment commitments, including a huge commitment of $15 billion from AstraZeneca. Now, that is to fund China's expansion plans. But when we're looking at human rights, results were a bit thinner, especially, as I said, on tougher issues. So you've got things like Starmer raising human rights concerns involving the case of the British citizen Jimmy Lai in Hong Kong and the treatment of the Uyghur minority. But both of those issues did come out with really little to no major concessions from China. Now, this has led to a mixed response from British media, which I'll show you on our newspaper review. But as it stands here, when we're looking at the report card, some would say that it's a moderately good one. And then wrapping up, we're coming home to the African continent now. And there's been a heavy security deployment in Niger's capital, Niamey, and the military leadership there is blaming France, Benin and Côte d'Ivoire for the gunfire and explosions heard overnight. So what has happened there is essentially shooting and detonations of bombs could be heard shortly after midnight on Wednesday. That's according to residents of a neighborhood very close to the Hamani International Airport. Calm did return a few hours later, but on state television, General Abdulrahman Tichani, who seized power in a coup back in 2023, he accused the presidents of France, Benin and Côte d'Ivoire of sponsoring the attack and vowed retaliation. There's no evidence as it stands that what he's claiming is true, but despite that blame, there are still suspicions that jihadists were responsible for the attack, as 11 arrests were made. Now, the military leadership has also thanked Russia for its help in foiling the attack, while relations with France, Benin, remain cold, unfortunately. So let's see what happens there. Let's move on to our newspaper headlines. As ever, we begin with the front page of This Day. And This Day reports that talks between the APC and Senator Rabiu Kwankwaso collapsed after he made what party sources described as unrealistic demands, including control of 20% of APC's national structure, a vice presidential slot, and long-term guarantees towards 2031. They're saying that he's overplayed his hand. This Day also reports that Fitch Ratings has downgraded Africa Export-Import Bank, most popularly known as Afreximbank's long-term issuer default rating, to BB+ from triple B minus, essentially. Now, Fitch also downgraded Afrexim's short-term IDR to B from F3, and the long-term ratings on the bank's global platform also downgraded those. Medium-term note program debt issuances from BB+ to triple B minus. So this is quite a messy situation, because we do know that last week Afreximbank did cut off its ties when it comes to Fitch and their rating services, and here we're seeing a week later Fitch coming out and downgrading all of these assets, or all of these aspects rather, of Afreximbank. So we'll see what happens there. Let's move on to our next paper. The Daily Independent does report that the National Agency for Food and Drug Administration and Control, that's NAFDAC of course, has resumed the full enforcement of the ban on the production and sale of sachet alcohol and drinks in bottles below 200 millilitres, alcoholic drinks in those mini bottles, citing essentially public health concerns and rising misuse amongst minors. The Daily Independent also reports that the Kano State government has assured residents that the lingering emirship tussle will soon be resolved through dialogue and respect for the rule of law. Now, the Commissioner for Information, that is one Ibrahim Waya, said that concrete steps are being taken to restore peace, while also calling on the Deputy Governor to resign if he can no longer align politically with Governor Abba Yusuf, stressing that cohesion and trust are essential for effective governance. So it's that story up there that we're talking about. Moving on to the New Telegraph this morning. The New Telegraph does report that the House of Representatives has passed the 58 trillion naira 2026 budget proposal for second reading, and it's resolved to probe the non-release of that 174 billion naira in development partners support. So we'll see what happens there. Let's take a look at the Daily Trust. The Daily Trust does report that the appointment of 5 out of 6 executive directors of the Nigerian Revenue Service allegedly violated provisions of the Nigerian Revenue Service Act of 2025. And that act mandates zonal representation on an alphabetical rotational basis. So essentially, according to the investigations, findings showed that only the South appointment complied with the law, none others. Moving on to The Punch. The Punch does report that the federal government's domestic borrowing has surged by about 9.2 trillion naira in 2025, and that crowds out businesses as private sector credit fell by 1.54 trillion naira. Shall we take a look at The Guardian? So it's this story right here. Essentially, cargo agents kicking as FAN increases the tariff by 257%. So they've raised their cargo tariffs from 7 naira to 25 naira per kilogram from the 2nd of February 2025, prompting criticism from freight operators over higher costs for businesses and consumers. Meanwhile, Aviation Minister Festus Keyamo did lead a Nigerian delegation in a global aviation conference over in Dublin, engaging partners on aircraft financing and sector growth. So we'll see what that develops into. Shall we take a look at our British papers? So we do have the Daily Star, and there have been mixed reactions to Sir Keir Starmer's travel and his trip to China. On the Star's front cover, we can see that Starmer, who is an Arsenal fan, he gave the match ball to Xi Jinping, who is a United fan. That was the official match ball from Arsenal and Manchester United's match at the weekend. So, I mean, it's not only Trump that receives gifts from other leaders. So we'll see what that does for the two of them. And that was, of course, during his 3-day visit to China. Moving on to our next papers, we do have The Guardian. And The Guardian also takes a look at this relationship between China and the United Kingdom. Essentially, they've been describing it as a reset. And then the Daily Mail also weighs in on this. The Daily Mail actually asks, is that it? They are not very happy with what he has brought back from this trip. They don't think that he has fulfilled their obligations or their expectations. Essentially, they said that he's come back to the United Kingdom almost empty-handed with only warm words and marginal deals. So quite tough there. And then we wrap things up with the Daily Mirror this morning. Don't know if you saw, but earlier Anthony Joshua did release a video on his social media, on YouTube, on Instagram, and he talks about essentially he is paying tribute to his two friends who were killed in a car crash here in Nigeria last month. Now, he is 36 years old, and he fought back tears actually in that video as he reflected on the loss of his two brothers who he called, as he referred to them. That is, of course, Lateef Ayodele and Sina Gami. So he talks about the anguish he's feeling over their death, but also is quite resilient and says that he himself does not fear death, and that he knows that he has two brothers on the other side there. So that wraps up our newspaper headlines and our Well Brief today. Love to hear your thoughts.
Real quickly, isn't it funny that America is toiling with something they'll never take? There's a long history in Canada as regards liberation movements. If you remember, Front de Libération de Québec, that tried so hard until Trudeau Sr. brought about the War Act in the 70s that quelled all of that. There were over 200 bombings and the likes. Canada shouldn't go straight to that again. But I hear we have a very vital interview with an Aftab Buck out there in Rwanda, so we'll go straight to that interview right about now. But thank you so much. You're always sparkling.
Thank you.
In your work and deed.
Thank you.